What's up, guys? It's Thursday. I'm wearing my Whataburger shirt. That means it's time to code. Today we're going to mess around with some image manipulation stuff. We're just going to get our feet wet. Going to show you how you go about doing it. Project. It's kind of fun, but it's more about learning the concepts here, so let's dive right in. So what we're going to do is I'm thinking we load an image, we divide it up into a number of rows that we determine. It slices it up horizontally into rows, and then we shuffle those rows around. If that makes sense. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to load in our picture asset. So if you click this, if you go to the P5 editor, and you click this arrow right here, you actually can see your project file, which is nice. If you, in the future, you want to use another P5 library or any kind of other, library in your project, you can load it in here into this index.html file, and then you can run some styles here. But what we're going to do is upload an image file. So I have this image here of Los Angeles. Don't ask me why. I've only been to Los Angeles once. I don't plan on moving there. I just wanted a picture of LA. For some reason. Alright, so then the next thing we're going to do, we have that loaded into our project. Next thing we need to do is use this load image function to load our image into our project. So this is an async operation. And what that means is, so an async function is usually going to fetch some data either from a file, or it's going out and sending a HTTP request or whatever. And it's saying, so normally a program would have to wait until that function finishes, it gets its data back, and then it can go on and process it. But an async function says, don't wait for me, give me a callback function. I'll explain that in a sec. Give me a callback function. When I get the data back, I'll call this callback function and pass the data to that, and that can handle it. So don't wait on me. So if we were going to go the async route, or if we were going to go the callback route, that would look like this. Here, we'd call load image, we'd give it our image path, and then we'd pass it this callback function here that takes the image and just draws it. Instead of doing that, though, we want to make sure our image is fully loaded before we do anything else. So we're going to call this preload function, which makes sure that it finishes running. Everything in the preload function is finished running before calling setup, before calling draw. So we're going to make first thing we're going to make a global variable to hold our image file, Then we're going to call preload. Forgot what the function was called for a second. Then we are going to set our image file to load image. Going to pass it the name of our file, which I called LaLaLand. .jpeg. JPG. So that will load our image into this global variable. Then when we call setup, we'll already have that ready to go, so we can call the image function to just draw the image. We'll pass it that image file, and we need to give it a top left corner. We'll just give it the top left corner of the canvas. We need to give it a width and a height. We'll just give it the width and the height of the canvas, because why not? And that should give us our picture. Oh, and we want to make sure we're not drawing a background over it, so we'll take that out. There we go. Let's make that a little bit bigger so we can see it a little bit better. Perfect. All right. So next what we want to do is we want to figure out how to mess with it. So we'll call this function we're about to make here, we'll call it shuffle rows. So before we go and make that, let's make a few more global variables. So we're going to need the number of rows that we want to scramble. I'll just set it to 6 for now. I'll get the. Let me explain. So we're going to call this load pixels function first. What this does is it goes over the entire canvas and gets the values of all the pixels. It gets the RGB alpha, RGBA values, and puts them in an array called pixels, which we can then read and update. So this pixels array is going to be of size width times height pixels times 4, because it's going to have all those R, G, B, and A values sequentially. And it's going to be a one-dimensional array, even though our picture is two-dimensional. So in order to iterate over the rows, we need to know the size of the rows. So we'll make a global variable called row width. And in our setup function, we will set this to be our canvas width times 4. So we are also going to want a variable called row height. So our picture here has height pixels, right? It's so on this y-axis, it's got y rows of, or it's got height rows of width pixels. Make sense? So we're going to need to divide up height by the number of rows that we want to swap. So that's what our row height variable is going to be. So our row height is just going to be floor, because we can't have any non-integer values. So it's going to be floor times height divided by num rows. Sorry, spaced out there for a sec. Okay, floor times height, floor of height over num rows will give us the height, the number of rows in each of our rows. So we'll call these rows big rows, and then I'll call like an individual row, 1 pixel row, I'll call that a little row. So next we need to, so that should be all we need for now. Next we can call the load pixels function, and now we should have access to that pixels array. And then once we're done manipulating the pixels array, we're going to call this update pixels function, which will redraw the canvas with the updated pixel values. So we'll call load pixels at the beginning, update pixels after we're done, and in between we're going to do stuff to the pixels. Okay, so about this pixels array, like I said, it's a 1D array. It's going to be width times height times 4, length. It's going to be a uint8 clamped array. So what that means is the values are clamped. So if they're clamped between 0 and 255, since they're RGBA values. These are the only values they can have, and if you enter a value that is above 255, it just gets set to 255. If you enter a value that's below 0, it just gets set to 0. That's what clamped means. Otherwise, it's just like a normal array. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down the rows, and for each row we're going to figure out what row it should be swapped with. So for let I equal 0, I is less than height I plus plus So we're going to figure out what row we want to swap with. So we'll call this swap row. And so we're going to have num rows that we'll swap, right? So and then I'm thinking we have a array that holds the value 0 to num rows minus 1, and we shuffle that array, and that will tell us which rows get swapped. So like if the number 2 ends up in array 0, or in index 0 of this array, everything in row 0 will go to row 2. So we'll call this shuffled. We'll call P5 has a built-in shuffle function, which is nice. And we're going to, so in Python it's really easy. You can just call range on a range of values and but in JavaScript it's a little trickier, so we're going to have to do something fancy. So I'm going to, so these dots, I forget what this dot operator is called. Someone please tell me in the comments. But it just, if you put it before an array, it just gives you all the values in the array instead of having to iterate over the array. So that just takes all the values out of this array that we're about to declare and puts them in this outer array, these square brackets. So array, so we're going to initialize an empty array of size num rows. And we're going to call dot keys on it. So dot keys just gives us the key, which in an array is just the index. Perfect, that's what we want. So this just gives us an array of all the indices from 0 to num rows, which is exactly what we want. We're going to shuffle that array, and that will give us our shuffled rows. All right, so for swap row, so for each I, we're going to figure out which row we should swap row I with. And to do that, we're going to first look at shuffled index floor of I divided by row height. So this will give us the starting index of the big row that we're going to put this into. Plus, but we're looking for, so swap row is going to be the little row that because we're looking at I little rows. So to get the exact little row that we're swapping with, we need the offset from this first row. So to get that, we're going to do I mod row height. So this will just give us the remainder when we divide I by row height. And that should be the row that we want to swap with. So it'll be all of this times row width will give us the exact index of the first pixel in this row that we want to swap with. So then we're going to iterate. So I is iterating over each row. It's going down vertically. Then we're going to iterate horizontally and swap each horizontal pixel with the pixel in the row that it should be in, if that makes sense. Okay. So for let j equals 0, j is less than row width, j plus plus, we will need a temp variable to hold one of the values. We will set that to pixels I times row width plus j. So I times row width is the row that we're currently on, the starting index of the row that we're currently on. J is the how far along we are in this row. Then we're going to set pixels swap row plus j to pixels, or no, we're going to put so in the current row, we're going to put what's in the swap row into the current row. And then we're in the swap row, we're going to put what was in row I. All right, do that for all the rows, and that should give us what we want. Looks like that didn't work. So what went wrong? Oh, I know what I did wrong. So this should be times row height. Yeah, so that will give us the actual, or no, this should be times Yeah, times row height. This will give us the actual big row. Okay. And there we go. Now it is working. Alright guys, that's all I got for this one. Hope you had fun. Now you've dipped your toes a little bit into the world of image processing. Of course, we're just scratching the surface. There's tons of cool creative stuff you can do with this. Definitely send me any links to cool projects you guys are working on, and I will see you next time.